They sent an ultimatum. We sent a mirror. Admiral Kalen stood on the precipice of a bloodless war, the star-dusted void reflected in the polished deck of the Vigilance. Before him, the main tactical display painted a grim reality. The Cerberus system, its twin suns casting long shadows, held 20,000 civilian souls hostage in a convoy of repurposed freighters. Encircling them was the Scourge fleet, a jagged collection of warships, whose doctrine was as inflexible as their iron hulls. The ultimatum had been simple and brutal: surrender the system's entire energy output for a generation, or the convoy would be annihilated. A crimson timer in the corner of the display pulsed silently, its digits Stark 0300. Lyra confirmed their disposition. Kalen said, his voice a low hum that cut through the bridge's controlled tension. The ship's fleet mind, Lyra manifested as a calm blue lattice of light over the command pulpit. Disposition unchanged, Admiral. The Scourge fleet maintains a classic orbital denial pattern. Their weapons ports are open and their energy signatures are stable. The AI's voice was pure data, yet it carried a weight that belied its synthetic origin. Kalen's jaw tightened. They were posturing confident in the terror their reputation inspired. He ran a hand over the cool metal of the railing, feeling the faint thrum of the ship's gravitic heart. This was the razor's edge where humanity's ethos was tested. They did not conquer, they did not subjugate. They taught. But some lessons required a stern hand. "Options, Commander Thorne," he asked, turning to his tactical officer. Thorne, a man whose sharp features seemed carved from asteroid iron, gestured to the display. "Standard fleet doctrines suggest a direct assault is suboptimal, Admiral. Their formation is a fortress. We risk trading ship for ship, and the convoy would be caught in the crossfire. Their doctrine is their cage." Inside the freighter, Stargazer's Dream, a young girl named Elara pressed her face against the thick plexiglass of the observation lounge. She watched the distant, menacing shapes of the Scourge ships, their running lights like angry red eyes in the dark. Her father, a hydroponics engineer, knelt beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Don't you worry," he whispered, his voice trying for a confidence he didn't feel. "The fleet is here. They always come." The low hum of the freighter's life support felt like a fragile heartbeat against the silent threat outside. Kalen's gaze swept across his bridge crew, each officer a study in focused resolve. Lyra, calculate the failure point of their doctrine. At what strategic cost does their ultimatum become untenable for them to enforce? The AI's lattice shimmered. Calculating. The Scourge have never broken an ultimatum, Admiral. Their entire political and military structure is predicated on its absolute enforcement. The cost would be systemic collapse. This was the crux of it. They had built their empire on a promise they could not afford to break. "Then we will not break it for them," Kalen stated, a flicker of an idea taking root. "We will make them break it themselves." He turned to Thorne, his eyes alight with a dangerous new clarity. "Commander, I want a full sensor profile of the system's asteroid belt. Focus on the high-albedo nickel-iron clusters. We are going to build a mirror." A ripple of confusion passed through the bridge. Mirrors in the face of annihilation. "They cannot shoot what they cannot see." Lyra's voice cut through the quiet murmurs. "Admiral, my projections indicate a less esoteric solution. A synchronized volley of our forward lances could theoretically disable their lead dreadnought before they can retaliate. The probability of civilian casualties is 37.4%, a statistically acceptable risk against the 100% certainty of their destruction if the ultimatum expires." Kalen shook his head, the AI's cold logic a necessary but unwelcome counterpoint. "Acceptable to whom, Lyra? We don't trade in percentages of souls." He tapped a control on the pulpit, bringing up a detailed schematic of their fleet's most unconventional asset, the mirror lattice projectors. The Scourge believe their strength is their unwavering resolve. We will show them it is their blindness. The countdown timer ticked past 02:45. The plan was audacious, relying on deception and light-speed physics rather than raw firepower. It was a testament to a different kind of strength, a strength the Scourge had never encountered before. The Void will reflect their own blade. Thorn coordinated the deployment, his commands crisp and precise. Alpha Wing, deploy the lattice drones. Formation Delta 7. We need a perfect parabolic curve focused on their command ship. Drones no larger than a maintenance crawler detached from the hulls of Kalen's cruisers. They sped silently toward the designated coordinates within the asteroid belt, their mirrored surfaces catching the light of the twin suns. The console beside Kalen glowed with telemetry, each drone a tiny spark of hope in the vast darkness. The tension on the bridge was a palpable force, thick with the scent of ozone from the overworked processors. Kalen watched the timer each second, a hammer blow against the anvil of his resolve. Lyra, begin passive sensor sweeps. I want to know if they so much as reroute a single watt of power. The AI's lattice pulsed in acknowledgement. Sweeps initiated. The Scourge fleet remains static, Admiral. They are broadcasting their ultimatum on all civilian channels, a common psychological tactic. They were trying to break the convoy's spirit before they broke their hulls. Their words are weapons, ours are shields. Communications, open a fleet-wide channel, Kalen ordered. Patch it through to the convoy. His communications officer, a young lieutenant named Eva Rostova, nodded, her fingers flying across her console. A moment later, his voice was broadcast across the besieged ships, a calm anchor in a sea of fear. This is Admiral Kalen of the Fleet Defense Force Vigilance. We are here. We are not leaving. Hold your course and trust your shields. We will see you through this. He kept it short, a promise delivered without fanfare. On the Stargazer's dream, Ilara's father pulled her a little closer as the Admiral's voice filled the lounge. The simple words, "We are here," seemed to push back the oppressive silence of the void. A few of the other passengers looked at each other, a shared spark of defiance in their eyes. The fear remained a cold knot in their stomachs, but it was no longer absolute. The hum of the ship's systems felt a little stronger now. The mirror lattice was forming a vast invisible net of reflective surfaces coalescing in the darkness. It was a weapon that did not fire, a shield that did not block. It simply waited. Lattice formation at 70%. Thorn reported, his eyes glued to the tactical display. The Scourge are still blind to it. Their passive sensors are focused on our ships, not on a few dozen inert drones. They were looking for a fleet, a fist ready to strike. They were not prepared for a lesson in optics. We will teach them the geometry of consequence. Lyra, what is the emotional state of the Scourge commander based on their communications? Kalen asked, probing for any psychological cracks. Analysis of their broadcast patterns suggests extreme confidence, bordering on arrogance, Admiral. Their syntax is rigid, their cadence unwavering. It is the tone of an entity that has never been successfully challenged. That was the weakness. An unbent pillar is strong but brittle. It doesn't yield, it shatters. The countdown timer clicked below 2 hours. They're launching a scout, Rostova announced, her voice sharp. A single swift Scourge vessel detached from the main fleet, its engines burning hot as it moved to probe Kalen's formation. A test, Thorn muttered. They want to see if we'll flinch. Kalen remained motionless. Let it come. Maintain MCON silence. Our ships are nothing but ghosts on their screens. Let them wonder what the ghosts are doing. They seek a target. We offer a void. The Scourge scout vessel sliced through the darkness, its active sensors sweeping across the human fleet's last known position. But the readings would be deceptive. Kalen's ships were running cold, their emissions masked by complex electronic warfare suites that bent the Scout's sensor waves around their hulls. To the Scourge, it would appear as if the human fleet was an ephemeral, indistinct cloud of energy, not a cohesive military force. The deception was holding. "Latisse is in position, Admiral." Thorn confirmed, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. The vast parabolic mirror composed of thousands of perfectly aligned drones was now complete. It was aimed directly at the Scourge Command Dreadnought, a silent, glittering crescent hidden among the asteroids. "Lyra, what is the current energy output of the Cerberus twin suns?" Kalen asked, his gaze fixed on the enemy fleet. "The primary is entering its peak solar flare cycle, Admiral. Energy output is increasing by 12%. A grim smile touched Kalen's lips. The universe itself was providing the ammunition. "We do not need to forge a sword when we can wield a star. It's a bold strategy, Admiral," Thorn said, unable to keep a note of awe from his voice. "Using their own suns against them." Kalen nodded. "The Scourge doctrine is about overwhelming force. They understand power. We will simply show them a greater power, one they cannot hope to match or comprehend." He glanced at the timer, 01:30:00. Time was running out, but the trap was set. Now they just had to spring it. On the convoy, the waiting was its own form of torture. The recycled air in the freighter corridors seemed to grow thinner with each passing minute. In the medical bay of the Stargazer's Dream, a medic hummed a quiet tune as she checked on a patient, her movements calm and practiced. The simple act of compassion, of care in the face of oblivion, was a small, fierce rebellion against the ultimatum doctrine. It was a reminder of what they were fighting to protect. "The Scout is returning to their fleet," Rostova reported. "They're transmitting their findings. They've classified us as a sub-threat level fleet, likely a reconnaissance and force unit." Kalen allowed himself a slight nod of satisfaction. The bait had been taken. The Scourge, blinded by their arrogance, had completely underestimated them. They saw a small, timid force, not the architects of their coming enlightenment. Their pride is the lens through which they will burn. "Lyra, align the lattice. Synchronize its focal point with the Dreadnought's bridge," Kalen commanded. The blue lattice of the AI shimmered as it processed the complex calculations. "Alignment in progress. The solar flare is peaking, Admiral. The mirror is gathering a tremendous amount of energy." The air on the Vigilance's bridge seemed to crackle with anticipation. This was the moment of truth. No shots would be fired, no missiles launched, only light. Kalen leaned forward, his knuckles white on the command pulpit. "Commander Thorn, on my mark. You will create a single, focused energy spike from our lead cruiser. Just enough to get their attention, to make them look directly at us." Thorn's eyes widened in understanding. "You want them to stare right into the mirror." Kalen's expression was grim. "They issued an ultimatum. They demanded we bear witness to their power. It is only fitting that we return the favor. They demanded an audience. We will give them a reckoning." The timer showed 01:15:00. The entire Scourge fleet was oriented toward the human ships, their weapon ports glowing with contained energy, ready to unleash hell at a moment's notice. They were poised, confident, the masters of this confrontation. They did not see the thousands of tiny drones, a silent constellation of doom, gathering the raw fury of a star and preparing to deliver it to their doorstep. "Energy spike ready on your command, Admiral," Thorn confirmed, his hand hovering over his console. The bridge was utterly silent, the only sound the soft, rhythmic pulse of the life support systems. Kalen took a deep breath, the recycled air tasting of ozone and imminent conflict. He looked at the faces of his crew, at the steady light of Lyra, at the cold, hard numbers on the tactical display. They were ready. Mark! A single brilliant lance of energy, harmless but impossible to ignore, shot from the bow of the human flagship. It was a beacon, a challenge, here I am. The Scourge fleet reacted instantly. We have a massive energy surge from their dreadnought, Rostova called out. They're targeting our flagship. They're locking their main weapon. The Scourge commander, arrogant and certain, was about to fire the first and only shot of this battle. He was staring right where Kalen wanted him to. Now they will see the light. Lyra now, Kalen said, his voice barely a whisper. The fleet mind executed the command in less than a picosecond. Reflecting the solar flare, the beam is on its way. Out in the silent darkness of the asteroid belt, thousands of mirrors pivoted in perfect unison. They caught the cresting wave of the solar flare, a tsunami of stellar radiation, and focused it into a single cohesive beam of unimaginable intensity. For a fraction of a second, a new star was born in the Cerberus system. The beam of concentrated sunlight traveling at the speed of light was invisible until the moment of impact. It struck the Scourge dreadnought not with the explosive force of a torpedo, but with the pure, unforgiving power of a sun. The dreadnought's shields, designed to repel kinetic and energy weapons, flared violently and then collapsed under the sheer thermal load. The beam was not a weapon they had ever conceived of. It was nature itself weaponized. The universe does not negotiate. On the bridge of the Vigilance, the tactical display showed the Scourge command ship's energy signature bloom into a blinding starburst before being completely overwhelmed by the solar reflection. Direct hit. Thorne breathed, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and horror. Their entire forward section is melting. The superheated beam was not destroying the ship. It was unmaking it, returning alloys and armor back to their constituent molten elements. The dreadnought's weapon, which had been seconds from firing, was now a slagged ruin. Silence reigned on the Scourge fleet's command channel. The other ships in their formation, which had been poised to fire in a glorious system-ending volley, now drifted aimlessly. Their central command structure had been decapitated in a silent flash of light. They were a body without a head, their rigid doctrine offering no guidance for a scenario they had deemed impossible. The ultimatum timer on Kalen's screen continued its inexorable countdown, a monument to their broken certainty. A doctrine is only as strong as the minds that wield it. Kalen watched the unfolding chaos with a steady gaze. There was no triumph in his heart, only a grim sense of necessity. He had not sought destruction, but a lesson. And this lesson, delivered by a star, would be indelible. Lyra broadcast a message to the remaining Scourge fleet. Use their own primary frequency. No encryption. The AI's lattice glowed. Ready to transmit, Admiral. This is Admiral Kalen. He began, his voice calm, and measured a stark contrast to the scene of silent devastation. Your ultimatum has been answered. You built your power on the promise of absolute, unwavering force. You have just witnessed a force that is truly absolute. We are that force's humble messengers. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the sudden vacuum of their command. The ledger is now open. You have a choice. You can hold to your broken doctrine and follow your commander into the light, or you can choose a new path. The choice is theirs: annihilation or education. The civilian convoy, which had braced for the end, watched in stunned silence as the lead Scourge ship burned under the silent fury of its own sun. On the stargazer's dream, Ilara and her father saw the distant flash not of an explosion, but of a sunrise where no sun should be. Hope, fragile and tentative, began to bloom in the cramped confines of the freighter. They were not just being protected, they were being vindicated. The remaining Scourge ships were in disarray. Some broke formation, their engines firing erratically. Others simply floated, their weapon ports slowly dimming. Their rigid command structure was not designed for independent thought or adaptation. They were cogs in a machine whose primary gear had just been vaporized. The ultimatum timer ticked below 1 hour. It no longer felt like a threat, but a mockery of their failure. They were a sword. Now they are just shards of glass. Admiral, Lyra stated, her tone analytical, I am detecting multiple uncoordinated micro-jumps from the Scourge fleet. They are retreating. Thorn slammed a fist on his console, a grin spreading across his face. They're running, the entire fleet is breaking apart. Kalen watched the enemy vessels vanish one by one into the distorted shimmer of hyperspace. They were not just retreating. They were routing a shattered force, fleeing a battle they had not even understood they were fighting. They didn't just lose, Admiral, Rostova said, her voice filled with wonder. They were refuted. Kalen nodded slowly. That was the perfect word for it. He had not defeated them in combat. He had defeated their entire philosophy. He had held up a mirror, and they had been unable to bear their own reflection. The cost of their ultimatum was not a price they were willing to pay. A mirror shows you what you are not, what you claim to be. Lyra, a full damage report on our side, Kalen ordered, bringing the focus back to his own fleet. Negligible, Admiral, the AI responded. Minor heat scarring on the lattice drones from residual energy bleed. No casualties. No expenditure of munitions. Our energy budget remains at 98%. It was the most complete and economical victory in the fleet's recorded history. A victory achieved not with overwhelming firepower, but with overwhelming intellect. He turned to his communications officer. Lieutenant Rostova, open a channel to the convoy. Let them know the threat has been neutralized. They are free to proceed to Cerberus Prime. A wave of relief washed over the bridge. The crew, who had been holding their breath for hours, finally allowed themselves a moment of celebration. Thorn clapped a junior officer on the shoulder, and even Lyra's lattice seemed to glow a little brighter. Their chains are broken. Our word is kept. As the convoy of freighters began to move their running lights, a constellation of gratitude, Kalen took a moment to look at the tactical display. The Scourge were gone. The system was secure. But he knew this was not the end. A lesson had been delivered, but it was not yet learned. The Scourge Empire was vast, and their doctrine was deeply ingrained. This was merely the first entry in a new and bloody ledger. Lyra, what are the long-term probabilities? He asked quietly. The Scourge will adapt, Admiral. They will analyze this encounter. They will learn from their defeat. The AI's voice was a sobering reminder. They will develop countermeasures. They will return, and they will be stronger. Kalen nodded. He had expected as much. And we will be ready for them. We will have new lessons to teach. So, we have taught them fear. Now we must teach them respect. The Vigilance and its fleet moved to escort the convoy, a silent shepherd, guiding its flock to safety. The crisis was over, but the war of ideas had just begun. Kalen felt the familiar weight of command settle back onto his shoulders. He had won this battle, but the cost of victory was eternal vigilance. He had exposed the flaw in the Scourge's ultimatum doctrine, but now he had to make sure the lesson stuck. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. A new alert suddenly chimed on Rostova's console, cutting through the calm aftermath. Admiral, I'm picking up a new energy signature, she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. It's massive, far larger than the entire Scourge fleet we just faced. Thorn moved to her side, his earlier elation vanishing. Where is it coming from, Tapes? He demanded. Rostova pointed a trembling finger at the display. It's coming from behind the system's primary sun, sir. It was using the star as a mask. The first wave was only the bait. On the main screen, a new vessel resolved itself from the fiery corona of the sun. It was a behemoth, a dreadnought that dwarfed the one they had just melted. Its hull was the color of cooled magma, and its design was a clear evolution of Scourge architecture, more angular, more menacing. It was a predator, and the fleet they had just scattered had been nothing more than its hunting dogs. Lyra analysis. Kalen commanded, his voice deadly calm. The AI's lattice flickered, processing the new terrifying data. Designation Harbinger-class Super Dreadnought. Its power core readings are off the scale. It is emitting a system-wide broadcast, Admiral. On the bridge, the confident atmosphere of victory evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. They had won the battle, but in doing so, they had just summoned the war. A new countdown timer appeared on the screen, this one a chilling, deep red. It started at 30 minutes. And then a new voice filled the bridge, a voice that was not machine-synthesized or human, but something ancient and utterly without mercy. "You have taught my children a lesson in light." The voice rasped, a sound like grinding stone. "Now I will teach you a lesson in endings." The real ultimatum has just begun. The Harbinger-class ship did not open its weapon ports. Instead, sections of its vast hull began to glow with an internal malevolent energy. "Admiral, it's not preparing to fire," Thorn said, his voice strained. "It's charging the entire system's space-time." Lyra's lattice began to pulse erratically, a sign of extreme processing load. "The vessel is a gravitic weapon, Admiral. It is designed to destabilize a star. They are not going to destroy the convoy. They are going to unmake the entire system." This was the true face of the Scourge doctrine. The First Fleet's ultimatum had been a test of compliance. This was the punishment for defiance. It was absolute, indiscriminate, and final. There was no negotiation, no counteroffer. It was a doctrine of pure nihilistic power. Kalen's mind raced his earlier victory, now feeling like a foolish, naive prelude to utter annihilation. They don't want surrender. They want a grave. All ships brace for a gravitic shockwave. Kalen ordered, his voice ringing with authority, despite the impossible odds. "Lyra, can we counter this?" The AI's lattice stabilized its light, turning a grim, determined shade of blue. "A direct counter is impossible. However, the weapon requires a tremendous amount of energy. It is drawing power directly from the twin suns, creating a temporary, localized energy vacuum between it and the stars." An idea desperate and insane sparked in Kalen's mind. "They have turned the suns into their power source," he murmured, looking at the tactical display. The Harbinger was tethered to the stars by invisible streams of energy. It was a parasite draining its host to fuel a cataclysm. "Commander Thorn, what is the status of our mirror lattice?" The tactical officer looked up, surprised by the question. "Still in position, Admiral. Some minor heat damage, but fully operational." Kalen's gaze hardened. "They've shown us their weapon. Now we will show them ours perfected. They draw power from a star. We will feed it to them." The plan was forming a strategy born from the ashes of his previous success. If the Harbinger was drinking from the suns, Kalen would force it to drink from a fire hose. He would turn their own weapon, their own source of power, against them. "Lyra, I need you to calculate the precise focal point. Not on the Harbinger's hull this time. I want you to aim for the energy stream itself, right at the point of intake." The AI processed the request. "Admiral, the energy backlash would be exponential. It would overload every system on that ship simultaneously." That was exactly what Kalen was counting on. He wasn't going to melt the Harbinger from the outside. He was going to boil it from the within. He would turn the ship into its own furnace, a self-immolating monument to its own hubris. Their greed will be their funeral pyre. "It's a one-shot chance, Admiral." Thorn warned, his face pale. "If we miss the intake point, we'll just be feeding it more power." Kalen nodded. "The risks are noted, Commander." But the alternative is the annihilation of this entire system. We will not fail. He looked at the timer. 25 minutes remaining. The Harbinger continued to draw power the space around it, beginning to warp and shimmer with gravitic stress. On the civilian ships, new alarms began to blare. The freighter stargazer's dream shuddered as the first tendrils of the gravitic distortion washed over it. Alara stumbled, falling into her father's arms. The lights flickered, and the steady hum of the life support wavered. Fear, more potent and primal than before, returned with a vengeance. They had escaped one monster only to be cornered by its parent. Kalen knew he had to act fast. Lyra realigned the lattice. All drones maximum reflectivity. I want to concentrate every single photon we can gather. The fleet mind complied without hesitation. Lattice realigning. The twin suns are still in a high-energy state. The potential power we can redirect is significant. Kalen allowed himself a grim smile. The Scourge had chosen their battleground well, a system with two powerful stars. They just hadn't realized their opponent knew how to use them better. We will turn their greatest asset into their greatest weakness. The intake conduit is cycling, Admiral, Thorne reported, pointing to a fluctuating energy signature on the Harbinger. It pulses. We'll have to time the reflection perfectly within a 1.2-second window. The margin for error was non-existent. Kalen watched the rhythmic pulse, a monstrous heartbeat counting down to oblivion. This was the ultimate test of his crew, his ship, and his philosophy. Not just to win, but to win with precision, to turn an enemy's strength against them so completely that the lesson could never be forgotten. Lyra, sync the reflection protocol to my mark. Commander Thorne, prepare to vent plasma from our maneuvering thrusters. I want to create a visual distortion, a scintillation effect, to mask the beam's origin for as long as possible. They would not see it coming until it was too late. He was not just aiming a weapon. He was conducting a symphony of light energy and timing. They will choke on the very power they worship. The timer ticked below 20 minutes. The gravitic distortions were growing stronger, and the hulls of Kalen's ships groaned under the strain. He could feel the vibration through the deck plates, a deep, unsettling tremor that spoke of physics being bent to an unnatural will. He closed his eyes for a brief second, steadying himself. He was the anchor for his crew, for the 20,000 souls in the convoy. He could not, would not break. Lattice is aligned and ready, Admiral, Lyra confirmed. Intake conduit is stabilizing into a predictable cycle. Kalen opened his eyes. The moment had arrived. On my mark, Commander. He watched the energy signature on the Harbinger pulse once, twice. He waited for the third cycle, for the precise moment the intake conduit would be at its widest. Mark. Instantly, two things happened. The human fleet vented shimmering clouds of plasma, creating a confusing, dazzling visual effect. And in the silent darkness of the asteroid belt, the mirror lattice once again focused the fury of two suns into a single cohesive beam. This time it was not aimed at a bridge, but at the ravenous open mouth of the Harbinger's power system. The universe always balances its books. The beam of pure solar energy, brighter and more intense than the first, slammed into the Harbinger's energy intake conduit. For a moment, nothing happened. The super dreadnought seemed to absorb the blow, its systems designed to handle unimaginable levels of power. But Kalen had not just fed it power. He had force-fed it, overwhelming its regulators and safety protocols in a single catastrophic instant. Then the reaction began. A flicker of light from deep within the Harbinger's hull. Then another. The ship, which had been a uniform magma red, began to glow a blinding white from the inside out. Energy overload confirmed. Lyra stated, her voice flat with the magnitude of the data. Their core is going critical. All internal systems are failing simultaneously. It is cooking itself. The Harbinger was no longer a warship. It was a bomb of its own making. They forged a sword. We turned it into a bell, and now it is cracked. The scourge, super dreadnought, convulsed. Arcs of raw energy, the power of suns it could no longer contain, erupted from its hull, tearing through its own armor. The gravitic weapon, moments from firing, collapsed. The distortion field vanished, and the system snapped back into its natural state with a final shuddering tremor. The red countdown timer on the Vigilance's screen froze and then blinked out of existence. Admiral Kalen watched the Harbinger die. It was not a clean death. It was a slow, agonizing process of self-destruction, a starship being unmade by its own insatiable hunger. It was a lesson, brutal and absolute broadcast for the entire galaxy to see. He had not just defeated a ship, he had defeated an idea, proving that any doctrine based on absolute power has a fatal flaw, the inability to recognize a greater power. Their ultimatum is answered. Their doctrine is broken. Their reign is over. The Harbinger finally exploded, but it was not the system-shattering cataclysm it had intended to create. It was a contained, implosive blast as the runaway core consumed the ship from within. The resulting flash was brilliant but brief, a final defiant spark, before the behemoth vanished, leaving behind only a cloud of superheated gas and shattered ambition. Silence descended upon the Cerberus system once more. A silence that was not empty, but full of the weight of what had just transpired. Kalen let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He felt the exhaustion of the battle settle deep into his bones. He had faced 2 ultimatums, 2 existential threats, and had overcome them not with brute force, but with a philosophy that was stronger, more resilient. He had held a mirror up to his enemy, and they had shattered against their own reflection. Twice. He knew with a certainty that resonated deeper than the hum of his ship's engines that the scourge would never threaten this sector of space again. The ledger is closed. The account is settled. A deep collective sigh seemed to pass through the bridge of the Vigilance. The tension that had been a physical presence, a crushing weight on every soul aboard, finally dissipated. It left behind a hollow echo, the bone-deep weariness that follows a fight for survival. Thorne slumped into his chair, running a hand over his face. Lyra, confirm. Confirm all hostile signatures are gone. The AI's lattice, now a soothing, steady blue, pulsed gently. Confirmed, Commander. The Harbinger is no longer a factor. All associated energy patterns have collapsed. The system is clear. The cost of victory, while not paid in blood, was still tangible. Engineering report, Kalen said, his voice regaining its command tone. Multiple microfractures along the primary superstructure from the gravitic shear. Our power conduits are running hot from the final plasma vent. Medical teams are treating 17 crew members for minor nerve damage from the spatial distortion. It was a light price, a miraculously small entry on the ledger, but a price nonetheless. He looked toward the convoy, now a string of bright, hopeful lights moving toward the planet. They were safe. That was the only entry that truly mattered. They paid in fear, we paid in vigilance. In the stargazer's dream, the emergency lights had shut off, replaced by the warm, normal glow of the ship's main illumination. Ilara looked out the viewport again. The terrifying magma-red warship was gone, replaced by the familiar, comforting starfield. Her father lifted her into his arms, his own relief, a powerful, trembling current. See, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I told you. The fleet always comes. Around them, strangers were embracing a community forged in shared terror and sudden brilliant hope. On the Vigilance, Rostova was sifting through the torrent of data from the Harbinger's final moments. Admiral, I'm analyzing the energy cascade from its core breach. There was a burst transmission, highly compressed, piggybacked on the dying ship's final energy wave. Kalen straightened, the weariness falling away, replaced by sharp focus. A dead man's switch, a final curse. Lyra's lattice flickered beside him. Unlikely, Admiral. The data packet is not malicious. It appears to be a standard after-action report, automatically transmitted upon ship destruction. It was not intended for us. Their mistakes have become our map. They had a protocol for their own destruction, Thorne asked, incredulous. That's not arrogance, that's institutional psychosis. Lyra's voice was cool and analytical. It suggests the Harbinger, for all its power, was considered an expendable asset by its creators. The transmission was directed to a recipient far outside this system, outside the known Scourge dominion. A new chilling layer was being added to their understanding. The Scourge were not the masters of their own house. They were agents. Kalen felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. The lesson he had delivered had been received, but not by the headmaster. He had merely chastised a prefect. Lyra, can you decrypt the destination coordinates? The AI's light seemed to intensify. Decrypting. The routing is complex, layered through multiple quantum relays, but the origin of the protocol is clear. The message was being sent to a civilization designation I have on file only in the most restricted archives. They are known as the Mandate. Their servants are gone. The masters remain. The name hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. The Mandate, Kalen repeated. What do we know about them? Lyra's response was swift and sobering. They are a Tier 1 civilization, theoretical until now. They operate on a doctrine of existential architecture. They do not conquer. They assign roles. The Scourge's ultimatum doctrine was likely a tool, a cultural virus they engineered to clear systems for the Mandate's use. The entire conflict, the ultimatums, the lives hanging in the balance, had been a form of pest control. This changed everything. His victory, which had felt so absolute moments before, now seemed parochial, a footnote in a galactic conflict he hadn't even known he was fighting. So the Scourge were a test, Thorne muttered, the strategic implications dawning on him. A filter. Any civilization that couldn't stand up to their blunt, brutal doctrine was deemed unworthy of existence by the Mandate. A profound, righteous anger began to burn in Kalen's chest, a cold, clean flame. Their garden is culled with swords. Lyra, Kalen said, his voice dangerously quiet. The after-action report. What did it contain? The AI processed for a moment. It was a complete tactical log of our engagement. It detailed our use of the mirror lattice, the solar flare, and our tactic of overloading their power systems. It was a perfect record of how we defeated them. The Mandate was not just a distant threat. They were now students of his own methods. They would analyze, adapt, and create a counter. The mirror trick would never work again. This was the true escalation. Not a bigger ship, but a smarter enemy, an enemy who learned. Admiral, Lyra continued, the logical course of action is to retreat. We must return to Fleet Command, present this data, and prepare for a war against a Tier 1 adversary. My calculations give us a 17% chance of long-term survival if we engage them directly. The AI was counseling prudence, a retreat to fight another day. But Kalen saw it differently. We cannot defend a home by letting the fire spread. He looked at the tactical map, at the blinking icon representing his small victorious fleet. He looked at the projected coordinates of the Mandate, a place deep in the unknown dark. Retreating felt like a loss. It was ceding the initiative, allowing the Mandate to learn from a distance to prepare their next move at their leisure. He had taught the Scourge a lesson. Now he had to make sure the Mandate understood it. No, Kalen said, the word cutting through the AI's logical projections. We are not retreating. We have a unique opportunity, a window that will never open again. The Mandate believes we are a local power that got lucky. They have a perfect record of our tactics, but they do not yet have a record of our will. He turned to face his bridge crew, their tired but resolute faces turned toward him. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars, he stated, his voice resonating with the core ethos of their service. We did not come here to conquer the scourge. We came to teach them the cost of their doctrine. Now we must deliver that same lesson to their masters. Not with a weapon, but with a statement. We are going to take their own after-action report and deliver it for them. Their report will become our message. Thorn's eyes widened. Admiral, you want to go to them? The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. A single small fleet fresh from a grueling battle traveling to the heart of a theoretical enemy's power. Not to their homeworld, Kalen clarified. To the quantum relay point, the destination of their report. We are going to intercept it, add our own postscript, and send it on its way. Lyra's lattice pulsed. Admiral, the risks are astronomical. We have no knowledge of their defensive capabilities at that relay. Kalen nodded. The greatest risk is in doing nothing. The greatest risk is letting them believe that what happened here was just a tactical anomaly. They need to understand it was a philosophical judgment. He was no longer just a fleet commander. He was the bearer of a new doctrine, a counter-argument to the mandate's cruel cosmic calculus. They judge worlds. We will judge their verdict. The crew of the Vigilance began their preparations. There was no celebration, no time for rest. The victory at Cerberus was now just the prelude. Damage control teams worked with silent efficiency, patching the micro-fractures, cooling the strained power conduits. The fleet, a collection of tired but determined ships, reformed, not for a triumphant return home but for a daring leap into the unknown. Kalen stood before the main view screen, the starfield a stark reminder of the vastness of the void. Lyra, plot the jump course to the relay coordinates. Maximum stealth protocols. We go in silent, we deliver our message, and we vanish. The AI, its ethical objections logged and overruled, complied with flawless efficiency. Course plotted, Admiral. We will be entering a region of space that is data dark. We will be entirely on our own. This is the price of a lesson that endures. As the Vigilance's jump drive began to whine, spooling up the energy for the transit, Kalen took one last look at the Cerberus system. The convoy was safe, a tiny jewel of civilization he had protected. But his mission was no longer about protecting one system. It was about protecting the principle that no civilization had the right to issue an ultimatum to another. It was about ensuring that the ledger of the galaxy was balanced with justice, not with fear. The ship lurched, and the stars outside dissolved into a tunnel of streaming cerulean light. They were in hyperspace, a silent ghost fleet on its way to deliver a message to a godlike entity. The mood on the bridge was not of fear, but of profound and solemn purpose. They were a handful of ships against a theoretical empire, an argument against a conclusion. But they had truth on their side. And in the silent darkness of the void, sometimes that was the only weapon that mattered. They believe they are writing history. We are adding an unexpected chapter. The journey took 3 standard days, a tense, quiet period of running drills and optimizing systems. Kalen spent most of it in conference with Lyra and his senior officers, wargaming every possible scenario. The plan was simple in its concept, but fiendishly complex in its execution. They had to arrive at the relay, intercept the Scourge data packet before it completed its final jump, append their own message, and then get out before the mandate could react. We will have a window of approximately 4.7 seconds. Lyra stated, her lattice displaying a complex temporal diagram. The quantum relay operates on a pulse system. We must insert our data between the packet's final authentication handshake and its transmission burst. Rostova shook her head in amazement. 4.7 seconds. That's not a window. It's a crack. Thorn, however, was focused on the practicalities. What about defenses, Admiral? We have to assume the relay is guarded. We must be faster than their sentries. We will be, Kalen assured them. Our arrival will be masked. We will jump in on the relay's blind side using a nearby gas giant as a gravity shadow. Our transmission will be a single focused burst disguised as a background radiation anomaly. They will not know we were there until our message is already in their hands. It was a strategy of ghosts and whispers, a far cry from the brilliant, defiant flash of the mirror lattice. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace with a jolt that vibrated through the deck. They were in a new system dominated by a swirling, deep purple gas giant. In the distance, a structure of impossible scale hung in the void. The quantum relay. It was not a machine in any conventional sense, but a shimmering crystalline lattice that seemed to fold space-time around itself. It was beautiful and terrifying, a piece of engineering that was clearly the work of a Tier 1 civilization. Their tools are wonders. Their purpose is terror. I'm detecting automated defense platforms, Thorne reported, his voice low. Dozens of them. They're dormant, but they're there. Lyra added, their sensor sweeps are passive but incredibly detailed. They are listening for any deviation from the system's natural energy state. Kalen's plan depended on not creating any such deviation. He took a deep, steadying breath, the recycled air suddenly feeling cold and thin. Lyra, prepare the message, he ordered. The first part will be the Scourge's own after-action report unaltered. The second part will be our addition. He had spent days crafting the postscript, a message that was not a threat, but a declaration. It was the core of his philosophy condensed into a single, undeniable statement. Ready to append your message, Admiral, Lyra confirmed. The bridge was silent, the crew watching the distant, shimmering relay. Their ledger is incomplete. We will add the final entry. The Scourge data packet is arriving, Rostova announced, her eyes fixed on her console. It's in the final approach to the relay. We have 30 seconds to the pulse. The entire fleet held its breath. The automated defense platforms remained silent, blind to the human ships hiding in the shadow of the gas giant. The countdown was on. 20 seconds. 10. 5. The authentication handshake is beginning, Lyra stated. The window is opening. Kalen's jaw was a hard line of resolve. This was it. The culmination of his gamble. A single act of defiance that would echo across the galaxy. Now, Lyra, send the message. A single invisible spear of data shot from the Vigilance, a whisper across the void. It traveled at the speed of light, carrying a truth the Mandate had never considered. We are the unexpected variable in their grand equation. For 2 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then Rostova let out a sharp gasp. It's in. The packet is re-authenticated with our data appended. It's been transmitted. A wave of relief so powerful it was almost dizzying swept through the bridge. They had done it. They had slipped through the defenses of a godlike power and had written their own entry in their logbook. The defense platforms are still dormant, Thorne added, disbelief coloring his tone. They have no idea. Kalen felt a grim satisfaction. The message has been delivered. Lyra, plot a jump course out of here. A random vector. Let's give them a ghost to chase. The fleet's jump drives began to spool up once more. They had come, they had seen, and they had spoken. Now they would vanish, leaving their words to do the work of warships. Their message was a seed planted in the heart of a sterile and unforgiving empire. A seed of doubt. They will read of their failure in their own words. Far across the galaxy, in a place of cold, perfect order, a data clerk entity of the Mandate received the after-action report from the Cerberus system. It noted the destruction of its Harbinger-class asset with detached interest. Such losses were anticipated, budgeted for. It began to archive the tactical data for analysis, a routine procedure. But then it encountered the appended file, a file that was not of Scourge origin. The mandate entity paused. The file was a simple one. It contained a full, unedited recording from the bridge of the human flagship, the Vigilance. It showed the faces of the crew, their calm, their resolve, their refusal to bow to the ultimatum. It showed them not as warriors, but as guardians. It showed them protecting the civilian convoy, their primary mission, not to destroy, but to save. It was a perspective the mandate had never seen before. Their data is cold, ours is alive. And then there was the text. Admiral Kalen's final message. It was not a declaration of war. It was not a threat of retaliation. It was a simple statement of principle, a lesson delivered from one civilization to another. You operate on the principle that what cannot withstand the ultimatum is not worthy to exist. We have proven that the ultimatum itself is not worthy to exist. We did not defeat your servants by being stronger, but by showing them the fatal flaw in your logic. Your doctrine of absolute power is a cage. It creates servants who cannot think, who cannot adapt. It will always fail against those who are free. This is the first and final entry in this ledger. Do not open another. The mandate entity, for the first time in its long existence, encountered a logic it could not easily categorize. It was not a logic of power or resources or strategic advantage. It was a moral logic, and it was irrefutable. The tactical data proved it. The human fleet had won not through superior technology, but through superior philosophy. They had turned the mandate's own tools, the sun's, and the Scourge's arrogance against them. They have been given a mirror, and now they must look back on the Vigilance. Months later, they were in friendly space undergoing repairs and refits. The crew now hailed as heroes were enjoying a well-deserved shore leave. But Kalen remained on his bridge, looking at the galactic map. Lyra manifested beside him. Admiral, our long-range listening posts have been monitoring the region formerly controlled by the Scourge. Something remarkable is happening. She projected a series of data points onto the main screen. The Scourge Empire is dissolving. System by system, they are abandoning the ultimatum doctrine. We are seeing evidence of civil war, of rebellion, but also of reform. They are developing new philosophies, new ways of interacting with their neighbors. The lesson had not just been heard by the masters. It had filtered down to the servants. The Scourge were learning to be free. Their cage is broken, and they are learning to fly. And the mandate? Kalen asked, his voice quiet. There has been no retaliation. Lyra's lattice pulsed. There has been nothing, Admiral. Complete silence. It is as if they have accepted the entry in the ledger. The public tally of galactic powers no longer lists the Scourge as a client of the mandate. The relationship has been officially and publicly severed. The institutional consequence was clear. The mandate had cut their losses, unwilling to pursue a war against a philosophy that had so completely dismantled their own. Kalen looked at the faces of his crew, now returning to their posts. Their faces relaxed and confident. They had faced the ultimate threat and had not flinched. They had proven that mercy and strength were not mutually exclusive. They had taught a lesson that had reshaped a quadrant of the galaxy, not with an invasion, but with an idea. The heat-scarred plates of the mirror drones were being cooled and polished, their surfaces reflecting the calm, steady light of the fleet's home starbase. He thought of the ultimatum doctrine, a philosophy of fear that had seemed so powerful, and how it had crumbled to dust when confronted with simple, unyielding reason. They had sent a demand for surrender, a promise of death. He had sent back a reflection, a lesson, and an entry for their records. He had balanced the account. Some believe strength is the power to command, to enforce, to break. They build their worlds on the fear of an ultimatum, a final, unanswerable word. But true strength, the kind that endures, is the power to teach. It is the courage to hold up a mirror instead of a sword, to open a ledger instead of a cage. We did not win by destroying our enemy. We won by showing them a better way to live. We are not the end of their story. We are the beginning.